Start recording, so okay. Well, Guy Leitch has a PhD in African airline connectivity. He's also a man after my own heart because he's a media entrepreneur. He's got a magazine called SA Flyer, which, Guy, it's got to be the toughest job. I thought most publishing is hard, but to be doing an airline magazine during the pandemic must be one of the most difficult livelihoods to have. We're going to talk about Mango in just a moment, but how's it going? How's it going in the business?
Well, it's tough to point out. I mean, the magazine, the print media space has been really constricted, really cramped just by the general way of advertising revenue from print. And then, on top of that, of course, with the whole general aviation industry has been under enormous pressure, particularly arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's continued on for, 15 months now. So we've been under a double squeeze, but fortunately the brand is strong and we're doing all right. We're surviving.
Yeah, well, the industry is very lucky to have you. You think somebody with your qualifications could probably be more gainfully employed elsewhere, but we're happy to have you in the media. And we're happy to be talking to you today about the craziness that's going on in the whole SAA Mango camp. We're here today. Mango is now going into business rescue. But Guy, I suppose the obvious question for outsiders is, why wasn't it already in business rescue if SAA was?
That is exactly the question. Travesty and a big surprise to all of us back in December 2019, when SAA was put into business without its subsidiaries. Its subsidiaries are dependent on SAA, and if SAA flounders and the subsidiaries go down. So there's been an enormous pressure on Mango to be put into business rescue, obviously, particularly with the COVID-19 crack. It's always had probably the weakest, I was going to say, balance. The fact is, though, that it doesn't have a balance sheet.
Your NetBank online bank will time out in 2 minutes, 59 seconds.
We've got, I don't know who's the crappy in his... But, the interesting point is that Mango doesn't have a balance sheet of its own because it's just been wrapped up as a subsidiary of SAA. But that, in a sense, has been its undoing as well, because it hasn't had any sort of resilience, to use the current chief popular phrase.
Your NetBank session will time out in 2 minutes.
To get it through
2 seconds.
I think there might be something on your side. One of the tabs open, maybe.
Yeah, my apologies. Do you want to?
No worries. No. We'll edit it out. No problem.
Edit it out. But anyway, the point I was making was that that Mango really just hasn't had either the ability or to develop a balance sheet of its own, and hasn't had any sort of reserves or the ability to actually raise the finance that or ancillary revenue sources that are, for instance, FlySafair, which has survived the COVID pandemic relatively unscathed, have done, and Airlink, which had made a very clear policy of investing into a solid balance sheet. So those airlines have done okay during the COVID pandemic. Mango has been pretty much neglected or been the ugly stepchild in some senses of SAA, and that's why it's quite frankly just not sustainable at this stage at all.
How have they managed to keep flying though? And how big are they? Maybe we should start at the market shares in South Africa. What slice of the pie, and it's a tiny pie, I guess, relatively speaking, does Mango have now?
Yeah, well, its share of the pie has decreased from around about 40% down to basically nothing. 2, possibly 3 aircraft in total. People are just not wanting to fly it, obviously, as well, simply because they're so often getting their flights cancelled. On-time performance is such an important criteria for choosing which airline to fly. And if there's any risk of the airline cancelling the flights on you, people are simply going to book elsewhere, particularly in such an intensely competitive market as the South African domestic market, particularly amongst the low-cost carriers. I mean, we've clearly got an overtraded market with FlySafair, Kalula, and if you like, BA coming back into the market. Lyft now also in the market, and Mango. There's a glut of seats, and there's price cutting. So there's no real margin opportunity for Mango there either.
So what about the poor souls who actually booked on Mango and have now got Mango tickets and are hoping that they're going to be able to go on holiday at some point in future with those tickets? What happens to them?
I think that they're going to enjoy what the industry so lovely and beautifully calls the cold comforts of a concurrent creditor. They're probably going to get this ghastly haircut. If you remember, the SAA concurrent creditors got 7 cents out of the rand, and even then they're struggling to get paid that. I suspect that Mango's concurrent creditors are going to get much the same sort of haircut. I think that one of the interesting aspects about this whole process, though, is that it's been driven by Labour once again. And the reason Labour drives it is because they are essentially preferred creditors. So they're able to get their money out of the process quicker. But at the end of the day, I suspect that the aircraft leaseholders who are already on a hiding to nothing are going to get absolutely pounded, as well, who knows what's going to happen to the other state-owned enterprises as creditors, particularly AXA and ATNS, the air navigation service. But they're also, and of course, the sister company, SAA Technical, which is also owed, off the top of my head, at least 110 million rand. So there are huge haircuts in the offing all around, because the 819 million that the government has by act of parliament now made available to Mango as part of the 2.6 billion bailout for the subsidiaries hasn't been released, and even if it is released, will not remotely be enough to actually save Mango and turn it around.
So it's pretty much gone, but at least the way it's being structured now, from Labour's perspective, being ahead of the queue as far as creditors are concerned, they must be thinking, well, at least they'll get paid, even if people down the line don't.
Well, I wouldn't be that comfortable if I was them. I think that obviously they're really crying out for the lack of their June and now July salaries, and of course for the salaries that they lost last year during the lockdown as well. They're talking having been 6 or 7 months in arrears on salaries. But the reality is that SAA staff didn't get that either. In the end, most of them have got to around about 3 months out of the total of 9 or so on average months owed. So there's not much comfort for them to think that they're going to get all their back pay and anything else due.
So that 800 odd million that is going to be, or that was passed by Parliament, it's effectively just going to go to creditors. So taxpayers are giving some more money to a business that has failed and has got no chance of coming out of it. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, I'm a little reluctant to say no chance of coming out of it. No, I think that if we take a long view, there is a need for a low-cost carrier that is a subsidiary or at least closely tied to SAA, assuming SAA gets going. I think that's the big question. But let's, for argument's sake, assume that SAA is somehow kept in the air, as it were. SAA does need a domestic carrier to feed and defeed its own hubs. And there's not really a market these days for what we call a full services carrier, with a business class. Most people are prepared to put up with cramped seats and plastic food for the hour 45 or so from Joburg to Cape Town. So there's a need for Mango, as long as SAA is around. Whether SAA should continue is a much bigger question, but it's not part of the current discussion. So as long as government is prepared to take a long view on this, and then Mango could survive, but the cost is going to be in the order of, the current cost estimates in the order of 5 billion rand. One of the biggest problems is to satisfy the leaseholders who already haven't been paid for as many as 6 months on the aircraft. And that is why 6 out of the 9 are currently firmly on the ground.
So if I was the part of the consortium looking at SAA, the first thing I'd do is cut loose Mango if it were possible, because that 5 billion liability is not something I'd like to take on. And then secondly, if I'm going to have a domestic service, why don't I run it myself? Why do I need to have a different brand doing it? What's the sense of actually keeping Mango within South African Airways?
Well, you make an extremely good point, because the Takata Consortium has now got its own little low-cost carrier already in the form of Lyft, and we know that CEO of the consortium, Giron Novik, is also the CEO of Lyft, deputy CEO. So it makes a lot of sense for them to bring in Lyft as the low-cost carrier into the SAA mix and let Mango go. Whether that's going to happen, I don't know, simply because government has shown a strong determination to protect at least some jobs, and most importantly to save face by not letting yet another state-owned enterprise fail.
So that's an interesting point you make, Guy. It could indeed be the sticking point. It could be the not negotiable that the new potential owners of South African Airways, because they're taking on enormous liabilities, not least reputational ones, by going into that, if they do go ahead with it. Maybe that'll be the point that chases them away if they're forced to take Mango. And then what? Then what for SAA, and then what for Mango?
Yeah, well, I think that the cut hugely surprised by the amount of pushback it's had from the general public about whether it really is a proper strategic equity partner, independent, or whether it's just a smoke and mirrors trick by government to route funding and subsidies for SAA through another entity, which presumably will also be sucking off costs as well. We don't know the answer to that question at this stage. We don't know whether the whole process is still going to survive the due diligence, which is still pending on this whole thing. So yeah, I could fully expect that there's going to be a slip between cup and lip on the whole Takatso strategic equity partner deal with SAA because of the resistance that the consortium must be finding to the continuation of SAA. Really, SAA, from a number of estimates who I respect, is going to cost in the order of 30 to 50 billion rand to get going back into a level of sustainability. And honestly, that's money that the government, we the taxpayers, just don't have. And if SAA goes, well, then there's obviously absolutely no justification for the continuation of Mango.
Thank you, Guy. That was very, as ever,